Good evening. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with Dave Frank, and we are talking national news of the day. And before we get started, I'd like to ask people if you want to contact us either at Access Humboldt or at Redwood Wonk at gmail.com as to whether you prefer this 3-topic rather than 5-topic format. I sure do. It allows us to get into more detail and the rest, but tell us what you think. I think our discussions have been a bit more productive. But I love input on that. Anyway, our first topic tonight, January 6th, there's more drama, a lot more salacious stuff, but I really think that we need to start maybe putting the salacious stuff aside and really focus on the substantive material that's coming, because I do believe that we are getting closer to actual indictments by the Department of Justice, and possibly we are also getting close to indictments in Georgia. They have subpoenaed, among others, the senator from South Carolina. What is his name?
Lindsey Graham.
Lindsey Graham, thank you. He opposed it in court. Judge said, nope, you've got to come down and testify. He is now challenging it again. He absolutely thinks it's a political gimmick, or I don't know if he thinks that, but he says it. But he was intimately involved. We had another hearing yesterday in which how do you say his name? Cipriano?
Cipollone, I think.
Cipollone, yes, was one of the part of Team Sane within,
or just Cipollone. It could just be Cipollone.
Team Sane of the Trump administration, and by Team Sane, I mean opportunists who realized things were getting crazy and jumped ship. I don't necessarily think all of these people are necessarily all that ethical, but jumped ship, got into screaming matches with people like Powell and Flynn, saying this is bat guano crazy, and got out early, but have now testified about early meetings in which basically Trump stopped acting like president and talked about how he could stay in power and started to plan things out. We've got the machinations of the tweets about where Trump says, come January 6th, it's going to be wild, and then what that did in Trump land. One prominent social media person known as the Salty Cracker, making references to the Red Wedding, a Game of Thrones reference that resulted in the massacre of the Stark family, probably the first ever Game of Thrones reference to reach a congressional investigative hearing. Anyway, we had testimony of a couple of the knuckleheads who showed up and marched, including a guy who ended up losing his house, becoming convicted, and he ended up apologizing to the police who showed up for the hearing, shook their hands. They accepted his apology. Another day of the hearing, there are probably going to be more hearings and more subpoenas. It looks like there's going to be more cooperation with the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice is there's going to be coordination around the fake electors, and which we've been talking about. Dave, what are the highlights for you?
I'll start at the beginning. So I guess the easiest way to frame this for me is that the testimony really did highlight a meeting that occurred 4 days after the Electoral College vote on December 14th. And 3 days after Senator Mitch McConnell stated publicly that we now had a president and vice president elect. So the mechanisms, the institutions had said their piece, and it wasn't accepted by the White House. And so I heard one commentator say that really we did get a new piece of information from Cassie Hutchinson that really showed that there was criminal liability and criminal contempt it reinforced what she had said before. And for people who don't remember, she was the sort of chief of staff or assistant of Mark Meadows, who was the president's chief of staff. I forgot her exact title, but basically she had a front row seat to all of it. The fact that you said the Justice Department is now in talks to pick up transcript language that has to do with the fake electors. But overall, what we really are starting to piece together is that Trump is at the center of all of these actions. And so there's like now witnesses, both witness testimony that really he's been involved in these conversations, all in each of them. And so once that day happened, this really was about a meeting that occurred, like I said, on the 18th, where the White House really did get more desperate. And so at one point they were talking about look, this is the plan. We're going to have Acting Attorney General Jeffrey Clark declare the election was a fraud. We're going to issue an executive order having the Department of Defense seize the voting machines, and this is going to be under the direction of Special Counsel Sidney Powell. And so Cassie's quote that I sort of foreshadowed here was that this is when the fraudulent election was not validated. They were looking for a loophole in the Constitution to exploit. So everything to that point was based on falsehoods. They hit a dead end, and they were going for this idea of doing something pretty crazy. But there were 6 hours of meetings and screaming with each other, where no longer were the White House lawyers being asked. They weren't at the center of the conversation. They were being brought into the room. And the room, everybody sort of yesterday referred to the room as the crazies. So this, like you said, the red wedding thing, the stuff of legend, some of these quotes, I guess Representative Raskin said they were unhinged. It was the craziest meeting of the Trump presidency. White House counsel Pat Cipollone, what he had said was he walked into the room and there was General Flynn, Sidney Powell, the Overstock guy. He didn't remember his name. That's Patrick Byrne, and Rudy Giuliani. And he said he was not happy to see them. They started attacking him because he was trying to be the voice of reason. And he pushed back and he said, where's the evidence? Show me the evidence. We got a very similar quote from White House senior advisor Eric Hirschman, who his response to the crazies was, are all of the judges corrupt? Even the judges that we appointed, you've lost every single case. You got no evidence. All you're saying is that the whole thing's corrupt. This is not good. It doesn't add up. And Rudy Giuliani was basically on Trump's side, saying you guys aren't tough enough. And so finally, this just my overview. Screaming and insults were unhinged. Went on for 6 hours, almost resulted in a physical confrontation between Flynn and one of the lawyers. Like they were heated. And so fast forward a couple hours or 1:42 a.m. December 19th. I think this might be one of the things we remember most about Trump's the guilty evidence that he puts out there against himself. He tweeted, "Big protest in D.C. on January 6th. Be there. We'll be wild." So it just shows like they said, all right, full throttle. We're all in. We're doing the crazy. And so that's when they decided that all bets were off. And then they go on to sort of reveal some coordination, some degree of, it hasn't really been fully fleshed out. But I think what they plan on going from here is that now they're just gonna do the timeline taking that last step, linking this premeditated activity to the people who organized the events of January 6th.
And you got to take into account too. They brought in some of these attorneys in this meeting didn't have security clearance. Probably shouldn't have even been in the room. Possibly, there's a lot of questions about that. And Giuliani is in there saying you guys are not tough enough, or maybe I put it another way: you're a bunch of P. I'm not sure if I can even say that because the show is going on television, radio. I'm not sure what the FCC rules are. It's not on George Carlin's list, but it's the P word. Excuse the expression. I'm almost certain the word was used. He said, and this is Giuliani. He's supposed to be, the above everything mayor. Well, I mean, we know he's not at this point. He's done so much. And Powell. They wanted to give her a job as special counsel with security clearance, and everybody is wondering, how did she even get in this circle? I mean, she just all of a sudden these people appeared out of nowhere. and all of a sudden they're sort of pushing out the regulars, and it was like a takeover of crazies,
Yeah.
and that's how they describe it. Now again, these are people who were like maybe saying, "Whoa, I don't want to go down with this ship." And so maybe in a way, it's sort of like, you signed up with a crazy. He's not crazy now. He's been crazy the whole time. And then all of a sudden it gets rough and you want to jump. I can almost see it from their point of view. It's sort of like, you wanted Trump. This is Trump. What is your problem? You shouldn't have signed on. So I can almost see their point. But, here they are turning on him. And, there it is.
So I think it's important to also talk about this other part, and I agree with you to a certain extent that, like, look, these, they are working for the Trump White House. They had to know what they were getting themselves into, but party politics, you've only got two, and you're either on one side or the other, and this is their side, so it's their team, and so that's just how it is. That I think that speaks for itself. But what I think it's worth pointing out is that the hearing yesterday also included, you said two people who were there at the event. One of them was Jason Van Tottenhove. He was the former spokesperson for the Oath Keepers. Mm-hmm. So he actually had a front row seat, similar to how Cassie Hutchinson had a front row seat to what was going on in the White House. This guy had a front row seat to what was going on with the Oath Keepers. And I've actually talked to people who were in Oath Keepers many years ago, and a lot of these people, they just think, in the back of their mind, they thought the country really is going in the wrong direction, and either they're former law enforcement in many cases or former military in many cases, and they really did think that there was a role for them, right? So I had this in the back of my mind when this person was testifying, and it came together. And so what he said was, like, under the leadership that this institution had in place, it really was going in the direction of they weren't really they were on standby for when the Insurrection Act was executed by President Trump. This would have given this is his words. He testified to this, that their vision does not include the rule of law. It includes violence. It would have given them a sense of legitimacy and a path forward that would have to become a paramilitary force. And that this could have been the spark that started a new civil war. And then he was being pressed. And he said, so the leadership of Oath Keepers, the leader's named Stuart Rhodes. Jason said Stuart Rhodes asked him to design the deck of cards, the death cards that the military uses. For example, in like Iraq, where you have like Saddam Hussein would be the highest card, and then his sons might be like the jacks or something. And so different people who you want to kill, then generals, so on and so forth, down the line, all the way down to from the ace to the two. And so Stuart Rhodes wanted this guy to design a deck of cards for people, for Oath Keepers to take out. So politicians and judges, all the way up to Hillary Clinton as the Queen of Hearts. So in a way, this was sort of that mentality that was permeating that culture. And that's why this guy, Jason Van Tottenhove, testified. He said he fears what the next election cycle will bring. He said we've been lucky. And then he said ever since the Bundy Ranch standoff, people have become more normalized when they point guns at law enforcement officers. The potential for violence has been there. And he said the gallows that were set up for Vice President Pence shows it's possible. And Trump has already showed he will whip up violence using lies and deceit. So I think today was a day where they have these, yesterday was the day where the testimony had these two competing elements. One where, okay, all the legal structures, all the tenets of normalcy within the White House it broke for sure. And then what was the direction? Trump does that tweet, and what is he doing? He's reaching out to the para power, the power of paramilitary, the power of these other outside forces. So I think it was it's a new development, it's a new set of facts. They're slowly making the case, trying to help our country, trying to help our citizens have it sink in what actually happened.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to discuss here about and then probably one of the things that January 6th isn't going to deal with is the insidiousness of this as to how it's affected the whole Republican Party, and the fact of the matter is you've got these people speaking up about what happened, but there's just going to be denialism. Republicans are now forced after the Hutchinsons to actually deal with this, and we'll see how they do it. But Lindsey Graham is going to be fighting this subpoena. I saw an interview with Tim Miller on one of the PBS shows last night. I think it was Amanpour. He, of course, is formerly an operative with a lot of Republicans. I won't say he's a liberal now. He's writing for The Bulwark, which is like one of the, I think, an enlightened conservative magazine is what I'd call it. And he talked about how he had hours of conversations with Lindsey Graham. Said Lindsey Graham hates Trump, hates him with a passion, but here he is in his camp. Has to be because the Republican voters want Trumpism, period, end of story. And so that's a very dangerous thing. And what this is bringing out, is it going to convert many of the Trump people, many of the 40%? I don't know. We've got maybe a minute left on this. Dave, you want to talk about that real quickly?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, and I don't recall the show. I wish I could give it credit, but I don't remember where I heard this exactly. But that after each of the January 6th hearing sessions, we're seeing that it's getting nearly zero coverage in the conservative right media circles, and it's making near zero impact on people who think that the whole thing is contrived and that the whole thing is staged and that it's illegitimate. But now that there's talk of the potential for Steve Bannon to actually testify and go on the record, to me, that signals that Trump realizes there's a vulnerability. His team recognizes that there's a vulnerability, even though they've done an extraordinary job of keeping, their team from paying attention to this. The history, it's not just in the moment. It's that the groundwork is being laid for him to take a real critical hit to his credibility.
And again, it's not just on TV that disappears now. The clips go across the media. So we'll talk more about that another time.
And the mayor was definitely intoxicated. There were suggestions by, I believe it was Mayor Giuliani, to go and declare victory and say that we won it outright.
It was far too early to be making any calls like that. Ballots were still being counted.
I don't know that I had a firm view as to what he should say in that circumstance. The results were still being counted.
Did you ever share, Mr. Kushner, your view of Mr. Giuliani? Did you ever share your perspective about him with the president?
I guess, yes.
Tell me what you said.
Basically, not the approach I would take if I was you.
We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election.
Okay, next segment. We're going to talk about Joe Biden. He's in the Middle East right now. A lot of anticipation around this. He wanted to make Saudi Arabia a pariah state. That was, of course, before we ended up involved, before Russia invaded Ukraine, and Russia had to be the pariah state. It's hard to make the two biggest oil producers in the world both pariah states when everybody still depends so much on oil. And so he is going there hoping to maybe get OPEC to possibly increase the oil supply when it's really not in their interest to do so, and to basically rally around isolating Russia to maybe put an earlier end to the war. That means, of course, that means maybe not worrying about journalists who are killed and cut to pieces and taken out of, out in briefcases. It means human rights abuses and things don't get addressed. It means a lot of things. And so, we'll see, what happens with it. But Biden is there. Wasn't something he planned to do. He met with Obrador before he left of Mexico. Mexico is very critical of the war in Ukraine and boycotted a summit of the Americas because Nicaragua, Venezuela, and I forget which other, I assume Cuba had been excluded.
Yeah.
And so on, and but they met and talked, and remember, Obrador was also one of the last to acknowledge the countries, along with the other, with a bunch of dictatorships, or strongmen, to acknowledge that Trump had lost the election. One of the very last, and he didn't want to hear much about how journalists are being killed in his country a lot, and partly possibly because of the rhetoric he gets against him. Biden is really trying to be a statesman here. He's got inflation. We've just now gotten a report that it's 9.1% inflation. Had another great jobs report. That's not good news for inflation, but inflation will probably drop at least a little bit by August, because the inflation was probably due mostly because the price of gas went up $5, but it has dropped over 50 cents. And they are anticipating that it may actually drop below 4 cents by the time we get to August, $4 a gallon. And that could possibly tame inflation, but that was not a headline Biden needed right now. Biden's approval ratings are in the tank. We discussed on previous shows that maybe it's not affecting Senate races. We'll have to discuss on a future show the House races. But already you see our own governor campaigning for running for president in 2024. You see the governor of Michigan campaigning. I mean, there's definitely blood in the water. And Biden, as we've talked about, is not a tough kind of leader. He's not one for rhetoric. He's one for calm restraint in his style as well as his policy. And he's not the type of people who looks like he's fighting, even when he is. I mean, even his response to the war in Ukraine has been very subdued. I mean, he probably did send those Polish jets to Ukraine, but nobody will ever know about it, even if that has helped possibly, keep Russians at bay. He's not taking credit for it, right? Is he the right leader for these moments? And there's a lot in there to talk about. Dave, I'm going to let you jump in and start where you want.
Yeah, so you covered a lot. You laid the groundwork here. I think it's worth pointing out that this is a Middle Eastern trip. He's going to Saudi Arabia and Israel. And he was greeted with open arms in Israel. He's got I think he's visited with every prime minister of Israel going back to the 70s. So to a certain extent, the role that he played as a normalizing, stabilizing force for the American political scene, it's starting to play. It in theory, it could be playing out on a trip like this.
Let me ask you real quickly: do they even have a prime minister right now? I thought the government collapsed.
They have a caretaker. I think his last name's Yuri.
Okay.
Yeah, and he also met with the president of Israel. So that's a reassurance of regional engagement and allied solidarity to a certain extent. In part, Trump did get some degree of credit, surprisingly, for his Middle Eastern negotiations. This is a wholly complicated, separate issue, but in theory, Saudi Arabia is our arguably second most important ally in the region. So by going to Israel and Saudi Arabia and saying, look, we need to remind ourselves what's so important here. Like you said, the economy is paramount for political continuity. The economy here in the United States, the reaction to inflation, to fuel prices, that knock-on effect into food costs because of both oh my
gas
goodness,
prices,
not just gas and fuel prices, but also the oh my goodness, fertilizer. So fertilizer is an oil product too. So globally, all this stuff is really interrelated, and because Biden had done He had staked a lot of his reputation on human rights because of the coalition within the Democratic Party. That's kind of where I was going to pivot to. Democratic Party coalition has a very high priority for human rights, and rightfully so. But it's about realpolitik. It's about balance. It's about figuring out a way to articulate what your priorities are and call your allies out when they're breaking those core values, but not shun them. And he did some shunning. He was shunning MBS. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and like you said, called him a pariah because of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, and also the Saudi human rights violations in their intervention in Yemen. But the global sanctions impact on Russia because of its invasion of Ukraine kind of broke that couldn't last. And beyond that, China has been making inroads into the Middle East. So that's like, not to just talk over you here, but the idea is that this reset was a pragmatic necessity. And so I'll finish with this here and then toss back to you. Primary issues: the capacity to increase oil production. Saudi Arabia is the largest buyer of U.S. weapons. Saudi Arabia is necessary as a regional counterweight to Iran, who's sending weapons over to Ukraine, to Russia. These drones, they're talking about sending hundreds of drones over to Russia. Iran's going to support them. Well, it turns out Israel's got new laser weapons, and Israel's they're going to sign some agreement. Likely that these new laser weapons that fight these drones, they're going to be able to help Ukraine, and so Joe Biden's trying to like thread the needle here by bringing MBS back into the fold publicly in return for a future promise. I think I read that it's like in September. Saudi Arabia and UAE are going to start increasing their oil capacity. I think 750,000 barrels a day by Saudi Arabia, and another 500,000 barrels a day by UAE, bumping it up to about an extra million and change barrels a day, which is 20% of Russia's daily production or so. So it's incremental progress. Just because Biden needs a real win in order to improve political prospects now in 2022 and for himself in 2024.
Well, that's interesting timing, because right now, if the prices are dropping, and it's interesting that they're dropping at peak time, but it's also people are going on vacations. If the oil prices are dropping and that starts to happen in September, that's probably just in time. I mean, I don't want to be cynical or anything, but that times it for the fall election cycle. Yeah. I mean, and if the prices drop down, down to $3, let's say, because that's a lot of oil going out into the market. I'm sure the Republicans are going to scream, well, that was deliberate manipulation, but what the hey? I mean, that's politics, right?
Right.
Interesting, if he gets this. But the price is huge. I guess the other advantage to that is he can do that without having to commit a huge future of infrastructure to oil domestically that becomes harder to undo if we start to move towards addressing climate change in this country. So there's trade-offs, but there also has to be an end to the war in Ukraine sometime, not far off. I mean, that's one of the reasons that food prices are being driven up. Now the longer range weapons, we don't know what kind of effect that's going to have. The Ukrainians are just starting to use them over the past couple of weeks. We'll see what type of impact it has on the front. But there's got to be some type of movement on that. And if the Russian front starts collapsing, that it might bring them to the negotiation table at that point. Maybe that's what they're hoping for. I don't know. Meanwhile, Jill Biden had a gaffe. I don't know what she was thinking. She's like, I don't know. So absolutely. And that does not help.
Tell people what it is. Not everybody knows what happened.
All right. She was addressing a Latino convention, and she made a reference to, she didn't mean anything by it, but she made a reference to the breakfast tacos of whatever city she was in.
Was it like San Antonio or somewhere?
San Antonio, and
referencing.
the Latinos living there as breakfast tacos, beautiful breakfast tacos. And I'm like, it doesn't even make sense, honestly. And it's like, what are you doing? And it's over, and she got a bunch of letters chastising her, saying you are oversimplifying our culture by referring us to that, blah, blah, blah. And she apologized. That's, difference between her and other certain figures and the rest. But why did she do that? Why did she think that was okay? Nobody knows. It's almost like, anyway, it's not, and it's something that hurts. Because Democrats are struggling to maintain, votes, particularly in Texas, Hispanic votes in Texas. Anyway, it's just, again, Biden is so far maybe not affecting all of the Senate races, but it is definitely a drag, whether he deserves it or not, on the Democrats' chances of holding on to either house in the fall. And it's looking pretty dim in the House so far, and maybe about 50-50 in the Senate. Don't need moments like this. Now we'll see how it plays out in the Middle East. It's also a long-term strategy, not just an election strategy. I mean, he needs a win. He needs a big win. We'll see how it goes.
So I know we there's a lot here, and we're pivoting away from an international trip to a First Lady's gaffe at a conference. Where the one key element here, though, is that it was a Latinx conference. And if you ask, you and I talked about it before, there are a lot of folks out there that are Latino or Latina. They say, please don't use that term. We don't use it. It doesn't even fit in our language. But it was a conference that was dedicated to that. And the speechwriters gave her this line where she gave three what she thought was flattering gestures of the diversity and the complexity and of the Latino community in general. And so, but then the food reference was tone deaf.
It was just bad.
Yeah. And so the National Association of Hispanic Journalists published a message that said something like, "We encourage the First Lady and her communications team to take time to better understand the complexities of our people and communities. Yes. We are not tacos. Our heritage as Latinos is shaped by various diasporas, cultures, and food traditions. Do not reduce us to stereotypes." And so there's been some feedback here that's like, and I have to give credit to Brianna Joy Gray. I think she's now on a show, The Hill Rising. It's The Hill Journal publishes a daily or nearly daily TV show, web show. And she said, it's a reductive way of viewing people through the superficial aspects of a diverse ethnic group instead of addressing people's common interests and concerns. The reason I thought it was important to mention this, because when you look at the polling, Biden specifically is not doing very well. If the election was held today, who would you vote for? New York Times poll that just came out, Biden gets 42, Trump gets 39. So that community is way more diverse than people even really are comfortable wrapping their head around, because you just picture to yourself, like, how can that be? There's lots of answers. There's lots of reasons why that could be. But our left-leaning, and I don't mean to overgeneralize, but this is the critique that's out there. The left-leaning staffers within the White House and within maybe the Democratic National Committee, they really are all in on making sure that they offend with the Latinx thing, and with they've just kind of missed the boat here, I think, a little bit. And the popularity has dropped immensely. It's gone from 63% to like 32%, so it's cut in half. There's just a whole bunch of reasons why this is something that we're going to have to look more deeply at as 2024 rolls around. The big topic here was, is Biden the right person for the time? And I think he was for the last election. It may not be the case for the next one.
We'll be talking about that, but 42 and 38, that leaves 20%, quote unquote, undecided. That's probably a lot of people sending a message, that might have voted for him, but are like saying, but I don't want to say that in this poll. But anyway, next topic.
One of the worst, most damaging decisions in modern history.
We could pass a law
to protect every woman's right to an abortion, and we should do that.
If this turns out to be the opinion of the court and it's issued, it could have a major impact on the outcome of this election.
Whoever committed this lawless act knew exactly what it could bring about.
Whoever did this leak should be prosecuted and should go to jail for a very long time. This has shaken the independence and the ability of the judiciary to function.
If the rationale of the decision as released were to be sustained, a whole range of rights are in question.
Okay, last topic for the night. We've got a Supreme Court. We've got a nation that is gradually becoming more progressive socially, becoming more progressive politically, as the demographics change, as society evolves, the attitudes towards everything from gay marriage to abortion rights to everything has actually become more progressive over the past 40 years and continues to become more progressive and on social issues. Even evangelicals, who are dead set against abortion, have young evangelicals are saying, but maybe that shouldn't be in the hands of the state. Are a lot of it. We have a whole social movement that is that way, and we have a strong push to possibly reform politics, across the board, and possibilities of organizing that may allow for progressive forces to have more political power in a lot of different state houses. And the rest, organizing under technology has made things a lot more possible. This voting process we have in California has opened up possibilities for progressives that are unprecedented, really. But what happens if you have a Supreme Court that can shoot everything down? A Supreme Court that basically is caught up in the 1950s, if not earlier, that is willing to just chuck precedent and not even act like conservative, but act reactionary and just shoot everything down. And one of them is hinting at it, that they want to reverse everything that the Supreme Court has done, going back through the Warren Court, and who knows if they'll even revisit Brown v. Board, which is the one they cited as the example of overturning precedent. So what do you do when you've got a branch of government, because it's lifetime, even if all of these changes lead to institutional transformations of the presidency and the legislative branches, if you've got this branch that is powerful, that it can strike down anything that the other two do, how do you resist it? Well, one of the things you learn in civics is one real limitation of the power of the judiciary is they can only address things that come to them. They can't actively go out and strike things down. They can only deal with what comes to them. And the Supreme Court can take on maybe 150 cases a year tops. And one of the ideas has been, if there are a lot of legislatures coming into power and governors, and if they do get to Congress and do have hold Congress for a while, and Biden is also approving set a record number in the first half or in recent history of appointing district court judges. In his first year, it's slowing down now. Is you pass a lot of laws. They can only overturn so many. Gavin Newsom just signed into a bill a law that allows Californians to sue gun manufacturers for negligence if it's too easy, if a jury finds that it was too easy to convert that weapon into something that is much more deadly than it is when you buy it on, retail. There are a bunch of Roe laws going on the books that are going to allow for people to come into their state and maybe even pay for money to go into other states and and doctors to advise them across state lines and the rest, and it might conflict with laws across the states and things like that could be struck down by the Supreme Court, saying you can't have doctors, on the phone advising patients in Texas of this, blah, blah, blah. I mean, they're passing laws that allow them to do that. There's all kinds of laws that and Congress may try to codify Roe v. Wade if the Democrats ever have that. Again, these things will get to the Supreme Court and they will be struck down, but sheer volume is one tactic. You pass law after law after law. They can only strike down so much, and before maybe a couple of these justices find the wisdom to say, you know what, maybe we're in the way, and maybe we don't have the right to do this, especially if any of them do find that they have to respect that they are not, that they are representing a society that no longer exists. I don't expect that Clarence Thomas will ever feel that way, but maybe Tony Barrett, who was lamenting the fact that her, majority is being seen as sort of a biased political panel rather than a issuing justice. And so I'm putting that out there, and also a general topic, Dave, as to how does a progressive movement address the fact that we are always going to continue to push for passing laws, knowing that they can be struck down by a Supreme Court that doesn't respect precedent and sees federal government as very limited and has a very narrow view as to what government can do in general.
So I'll start real broadly, and then I think we could look at a couple of these elements that you've mentioned. One thing that has always struck me in the history of Western thought is the Martin Luther, the Reformation. And that at the time in Europe, the church, the Catholic Church, was the dominant legal force for continental Europe. And as people got a little bit wiser, a little bit smarter, there's an enlightenment, and people are starting to use like predicate logic, which basically just means you actually are making arguments based on, does this piece of information plus that piece of information directly causally result in this third piece, right? So one of the things he did when he attached the complaints to the door of the cathedral was he said, basically he's saying, explain to me using the text of the Bible and the laws of logic how the things that you guys do that are ridiculous, how does that add up? How are you justifying it? And there were some princes and king, basically royalty, leaders of communities in the northern part of Europe that said, I like this guy. I like the fact that he's challenging these people because it's going to help me. It's going to get a little power on my side. So the reason I mention this is because our system was set up with checks and balances between three co-equal branches. And this court is not supreme. It's a Supreme Court, but it is not the supreme law of the land. The people are the supreme law of the land. So we have mechanisms at our disposal. Some people are talking about packing the court. Some people are talking about creating multiple districts with multiple Supreme Courts so that we could hear more cases and that we can take away some of the power of people who are, I would argue, irresponsibly abusing their privileges currently, but that's a bigger issue. It's a separate issue. But more importantly, the legislature has the capacity. I've seen it written before. The legislature has the capacity to say, well, there are certain rules like, hey, appointment for life. Well, maybe you're not appointed for life anymore, or you have the jurisdiction of the entirety of all the laws of the land. Well, maybe you don't have jurisdiction over something like some core fundamental piece of our separation of church and state. You lost your privileges. You proved that you don't know how to manage the separation of church and state. It should exist. You broke it. We're putting it in a legislative law, and you're not able to take it away during our lifetime, et cetera. So there are federal legislative ways to do it. The executive could, like you said, I don't know if you said it now or to me in a separate conversation, the executive could ignore it. The Supreme Court could say, you know what, you guys can't regulate on climate change, and the executive could say, I'm the executive. It's the imperial presidency. It's been the imperial presidency for 50 years. This is an existential threat to the world. Supreme Court, you lost your privileges. So these are big things, but more to what you're talking about is at the state legislative side. So what Gavin did, and I think, well, let's look at this Firearms Industry Responsibility Act as a great example. Gavin's quote was, nearly every industry in this country is held to account when their products cause harm or injury, except one, the gun industry. Today, California is going to change that. They can no longer hide from the mass destruction they've caused. He's actually wrong, because the pharmaceutical industry also has very similar liability waivers. But point is, he was making a political emotive point. The law of the land, the federal law of the land, the 2005 Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act says it's a liability waiver, except for when they have practiced negligence or breach of contract. You could argue that mass murder that is promoted through advertising, like some of these weapons manufacturers have done, that's negligence. It's arguably gross negligence. So it creates a legal space for this new Firearms Industry Responsibility Act to actually hold people accountable for the way that they market these products. On behalf of the 3,000 or so people a year that are killed in California. So there are other ways to expand the power of the people at the state level that can be argued as justifiable and worthwhile, for example.
You're right. There are a lot. Now, of course, the imperial presidency, that's a very scary thing. Andrew Jackson did it when he ignored the Supreme Court, who ordered that they needed to honor the Cherokee treaties. And some people say that was basically a passive military coup, right? So got to be careful on that one. But, there are kind of processes on that. But the one thing is, well, presidents might not be reelected because of that, right? That's the limitation on the president right? A president decides to ignore the Supreme Court, they go to get reelected, or their party goes to get reelected, and the voters say, we didn't like that, and they can be out.
But let's just mention real quick, not to interrupt your train of thought, but like the John Lewis Act and renewal of the Voter Rights Act, like these are things that were really important. About 2 years ago, everybody was freaking out, like, oh my God, we have to figure out a way for Congress to pass and expand and enhance and defend our rights to have an integrity in our elections. That might be a higher principle. So some higher principles might be worth fighting for.
Yeah. Of course, we can't get that through Congress right now, so it doesn't really matter. But it's there, and stacking the court. I'm concerned about stacking the court, because I'm concerned if it goes back and forth between Democrats and Republicans again anytime soon, we might end up with 50 people on the Supreme Court down the road. It's just, but you can argue we've got 13 circuits. It was originally kind of structured around the circuits. We had 9 Supreme Court justices when we had 9 circuits. We could have 13. That's not totally unruly, and so 4 more justices wouldn't be a bad thing. But it's obviously a very political thing, and the Democrats don't have the power to muscle that through right now. And probably won't unless they get all 3 branches, or both the House, Senate, and then the presidency back in 2024, and something like that might happen over the next decade or so. And who knows? They may talk about it, especially if a whole lot of stuff continues to happen, and especially if the Supreme Court is out of control, as they were this last session, and that was in some minds, including my own, out of control.
So let me ask you this. I think abortion is also, I'm sure we could talk for hours, but abortion is another one of those issues right now where some of the remedies are talked about are, like, I think Biden signed an executive order. The days blur together. I don't know if it was last Friday or the Friday before. I think it was the Friday before, but it was basically saying, like, he wanted to do what he could do to protect the right to have, contraception sent across state lines. And in theory, like, California is talking about funding anybody in the country who wants to come to California for the rights of to basically maintain abortion rights, etc. So there are legislative ways that could be buttressed by executive power. What are your thoughts on that?
And he's also telling pharmaceutical companies, hey, you'll be in trouble with us if you deny anybody their prescriptions. For this type of thing. So that's going to put them, they'll probably have to sue in court, right? Because they're going to say, well, the Department of Justice is telling us that we can get nailed if we honor those prescriptions. The government of Texas is telling us we'll get nailed if we don't. Judge, tell us what to do. So it's going to end up there. And that'll be interesting. And that's going to be another one of those cases that has to get to the Supreme Court. And that's going to take up 150, again, per year. I mean, these are the types of things that have to be done. And, I wish Biden would issue 100 executive orders like that, again, flood them. I mean, that's the thing you do. And who has primacy there? Is that a federal thing that's protected by the Commerce Clause? I don't know. I know one way or another, but it is going to raise an interesting legal issue, and it's going to put pharmaceutical companies under a lot of pressure. And what if the order, if it's across state lines, if a woman in Texas is ordering it in Illinois and it gets mailed back to Texas, Texas doesn't have any jurisdiction to prosecute the company in Illinois. They can prosecute the woman, but that's about it. But I think according to the order, I think even if she orders it from a company in Texas, from what I'm understanding, they can't deny her that prescription. It's federally guaranteed.
Yeah, I was gonna say I saw a statistic recently that over half of all abortions are already medical. So and the vast 90% occur within the first 4 months or so, 16 weeks. So there's already a plurality, if not a majority, of people in this country who got used to this right.
And I'm not even sure that accounts for the morning after pill. I mean, technically, that's an abortion, right?
Right.
I mean,
And so what I was going to get, I know we have just a few minutes left, but this right to privacy that's supposed to underpin all of this, I think if we, the people, were told, and if there was a national effort to figure out a way to say, okay, the right to privacy, which gives us this, and this, which we already had, and this, and this, which we aspire to. If that right to privacy is something that the court has in fact threatened, it's really important we do everything that we can to show them that we, the people, are sovereign here in this country. It was designed that way. I think there could be a national campaign that would be bipartisan support and kind of break the shackles of this bipolar tug of war between the two establishment parties.
All right. Well, we'll have to talk about this more in a future show. But obviously, the Supreme Court is going to be a big topic of discussion in the future. Okay. This brings us to the prediction stage. What do you got for us, Dave?
So mine's pretty straightforward. After watching the January 6th committee yesterday and then today, seeing that there was a press release, or at least coverage in the press, that the committee and the Department of Justice are in communication, I want to follow up on my prediction from last week, thinking that there were criminal charges in the mix. So just for people who don't know, that the Representative Bernie Thompson, Democrat of Missouri, chairman of the January 6th committee, he did say on Capitol Hill publicly to reporters that the panel is in discussion about the false elector scheme, and the Department of Justice wants the transcripts. And so that's basically the first step of bringing people in and getting people on the record and determining where criminal liability actually stands. So I think Mr. Trump former President Trump finds himself at the center of a criminal conspiracy as we speak.
Okay, I'll be real quick, but I am making my first election call for November. John Fetterman has actually, his stroke turns out to have been a lot more serious. So if he survives, he's going to win. But he has been actually going through speech therapy and the rest. He may never be able to actually speak as well as he did. He's lost a lot of weight. He's just gone back out onto the campaign trail. He was in Pittsburgh yesterday. But he is, a steel, was a mayor of a town, of a steel town, is a working kind of guy. He has a brilliant ad that he put out that just paints Oz as a complete, he's got like 9 homes, or they did a rich and lifestyles, a rich and famous type of guy. He's got homes in Turkey, Florida, New Jersey, and the rest, and finally bought a home in Pennsylvania. Oz has been radio silent. He's been tweeting about how Fetterman's an extreme liberal and a socialist, completely ineffective. He doesn't know how to present his message. Fetterman is painting him as an outsider, out of touch with Pennsylvania. Oz is just trying to tie him to Biden. It's not working. Fetterman, I think, is 9 points ahead in the latest poll. I don't see how Oz turns this around. I am calling John Fetterman, as long as he survives, he will win, and that is a flip for the Democrats in Pennsylvania in November.
This is totally the one I was going to do, so I am glad you did it, and I took a different one. I agree with you 100%. I think he's a solid candidate for that state, and I think it's going to happen.
Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.